Hey, welcome to How to Play, brought to you by the Games Capital. Today, the game we're looking at is Discoveries, the Journals of Lewis and Clark. Now, this game is actually the second game based on the same Lewis and Clark story, the famous American explorers, by the same designers. So clearly they like this theme, or at least they've done the research on it and have decided to create a couple of games based on this same subject matter. The games are quite different. The original Lewis and Clark game was a worker placement style race game, I guess you'd call it, whereas this game is a dice game at its heart. Both of them, though, have the theme of exploration, and that theme shines through nicely in this game. So before we get into how it works, let's have a look at what's in the box. Each player will have a set of 5 dice in their colour. There are also some grey dice, which are neutral dice that can be used during the game, and there are 10 of those that are included. Then also a deck of cards. Now the cards serve two purposes. On one side you'll have the exploration cards, which show various forms of terrain that have to be explored. And then on the flip side of the card are the Indian tribe cards. Now these cards are collected by the players and provide some special abilities during the game. So we've got a set of cards. Each player also has a little player board, which they use to keep track of the actions that they're taking with their dice. The dice are actually placed on the board to represent those. Also a little player reference card which has some information on scoring for the end of the game. And finally, a player board, or rather a game board, which is used to store the dice that have been used each turn, and so they'll pile up on that, and also the cards are laid on the outside of that board as well. So they're the components for the game. Let's have a look now at how the game plays. So to begin the game, you'll take the deck of cards and you'll lay out 3 of the exploration cards on this side of the board and 3 of the Indian tribe cards on the other side of the board. Then to begin with, each player, beginning with the start player, will select one of these cards to add to their play area, and that's going to be the first card that they're going to attempt to explore. Each player will take a card, and then the cards are filled back up to 3, so there's always 3 on each side for the players to choose from as the game progresses. Then, at the start of your turn, at least the first turn, you will roll your dice, and you will place those into your play area ready to use on subsequent turns. Now basically each turn of this game requires you to use one or more of your dice to take actions or to set up actions on your board. Now there are some actions that will only require one turn to complete, and there are other actions that might require multiple turns to set up and eventually repeat. So let's first of all have a look at the actions that just take a single turn to complete. So the first action at the top of the board here requires 1 dice, and the question mark symbol indicates that it can be any dice, showing any symbol. So you'll take that symbol, or that dice, and you'll place it onto that action spot, and this action allows you to swap the exploration card that you have. So you may have found that that card is proving difficult to complete, and so you might like to swap it, or there may be a card that you feel is better for your game plan, and so you can exchange it with the card that you have. Then after you've completed that action, anytime, and you'll notice on the board there's a little arrow at the top of the square where the dice goes, whenever that symbol appears, that means after the action that dice is sent to the main board. And depending on the symbol that you've used on the dice, it will either go to the right or to the left of the board. And it stays there out of play until the point where you may get to retrieve those dice, but more on that later. Okay, so the second action that you can perform that takes a single turn involves the Indian tribe cards, and in order to take this action you need to have one of these Indian heads on your dice. So you'll place it onto that spot on the action board, and you can then take one of the Indian cards. Now, the Indian cards, there are 2 types. There are what we refer to as the friendly Indians, and then also the wary Indians. So the friendly Indians have this little light coloured symbol, and the wary ones have the darker symbol at the top. And this first action that we're talking about is relating to the friendly Indians. So by playing a single Indian head dice, you get to take one of these Indian cards and place it in your play area. Now that will give you some advantage, some action perhaps during the game, or some permanent advantage that you can utilise. In this case, it's an exploration action which you can use in addition to the other actions that you have on your play area. As well as that, you also get to take one of these grey dice, and you roll that and add it to the dice in your play area. You can now use that dice to carry out actions as well. Now as the game progresses, these dice are going to be used up by the players and they'll be on player boards. If there are no dice left in the supply and you take a tribe card, you're allowed to take a dice. You can take it from one of the other players. And generally speaking, it's taken from the player who has the most grey dice in their supply. You get to take one of their dice, add it to your collection. The interesting thing about that is that dice may be on an action set up for a subsequent turn, which could mess up the other player's turn a little bit. Something to bear in mind. The second action to do with Indian tribes requires 2 dice showing the same Indian head. You'll use both of those dice at the same time, place it on the board, and get to take one of the cards that shows the wary Indian tribe. Generally speaking, they are a little bit better, and the rewards they provide are better than the friendly ones. Once again, any of those dice that are used get placed out onto the main board and are out of play for the time being. The final single turn action that you can take is over here on the board. Once again, this can be any dice of any symbol, shows the question mark icon. Place that on the board. This allows you to re-roll 1 or 2 of your dice that are currently on your in your play area. So if you've got things that you're not really happy with, that you can't use, you can utilise that action and re-roll 2 of the dice and hopefully get something that's more useful. Once again, that dice goes out onto the board depending on the symbol that is on it. So they are basically the single actions that you can take on a turn. The remaining actions are at the bottom of the board and they relate to exploration. And generally speaking, they're going to require you 2 or more turns in order to set up. So let's have a look at those now separately. So exploration really is the main part of this game, and each of these cards that you'll have in your play area, one at a time, is going to have different types of terrain that you must cross in order to complete the card. So this example shows 3 rivers and 1 mountain. So to complete this card and add it to my scoring pile, I've got to be able to cross those different terrain types, and I do that by taking the actions on my board. Now these actions are going to require multiple turns to set them up. You'll notice that on the bottom of the board there's an action here that allows you to cross 2 rivers, an action that allows you to cross 3 rivers, and one that allows you to cross 2 mountains. So in order to cross this card, I'm going to have to use the 3 river action and also the 2 mountain action. Now the other important thing to note is it must be done in the order that is shown on the card from the bottom of the card to the top. And that's fairly important. Some of the cards have interesting combinations that you've got to figure out how to get them in the right order. So to carry out the action, each of these actions is going to require 2 dice of 2 different symbols. And so it's going to require multiple turns, because on each turn I can only use the symbols on one type of dice. So for example, with the crossing 3 rivers, you'll notice that it has the footprint symbol on it, representing hiking. So if I'm going to take that action, I can only use dice that have that symbol on it. And in this case, there are 2 squares, so I need 2 dice that show that symbol in order to set this action up. So if I had that, I could then place one of those onto that symbol. Now you'll notice the other square at the bottom there has the arrow. So this tells me that this second dice goes out to the general board. It's used up. The remaining dice stays there to indicate that that action has been set up and is ready to go. So I'm done. That's my turn. Then my next turn, I need to set up to cross the mountains. So to cross the mountains, I actually need 3 dice. And in this case, it has the question mark symbol. So I need 3 dice that have the same symbol, but it can be any symbol. So just for argument's sake, if I've got 3 dice that show, once again, the footprint symbol, that's fine. I can use those, and I place one of them onto the action, the remaining 2 with the arrows head out onto the board. So now both of those are set up, ready to go. What I need to complete them now is the journal symbol, which is the little letter A. So I would need, once again, to have 2 dice, one for each expedition spot, in order to carry out those actions. So let's say I've got those 2 ready to go. I would then place them on the board, and now I can cross 3 rivers and 2 mountains on a single turn. That allows me to complete this card, and I would then take that and place it under my score reference card. And that at the end of the game, that will score me points. Now, what happens to these dice? Well, this is a little bit different. These dice don't end up on the main board. You'll notice there's a little symbol there of arrows in a circle. So what that means is these dice are recycled. So now I get to take those 4 dice, re-roll them, and add them back into my play area. Now they're ready to be used for subsequent actions as the game progresses. Now, the reason why I would want to be collecting these cards, well, some of them have a point value in the bottom corner. So at the end of the game, I'm going to earn those points for completing that terrain card. Some of them have the little symbol, and there are 4 different symbols that will appear during the game, and you're going to get bonus points for collecting sets of those symbols. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, all those cards are going to earn you points. Once you've completed a terrain, you just get to select one of the 3 remaining cards, add it to your area as your next card to begin exploring, and replace the one that you've taken. And then it'll be the next player's turn, and you're ready to go. Now, eventually, depending on the actions that you take, you're going to run out of dice, or you're going to be very limited because some of your dice have ended up on the main board. So, how do you get those dice back? Well, let's have a look at that now. So there are a couple of ways that you can retrieve dice and get them back into play so that you can carry out more actions. You can either take all of the dice from this side of the board back into play, or you can take all of the dice from this side of the board back into play. Now what that means is you get to take back, obviously, whatever dice of your colour that are there. You get to take back any grey dice that are on this side of the board, and potentially, if there are other players' dice sitting there, you also get to take their dice as well. You get to roll those dice, add them to your play area, and you can use them as if they were your own to set up actions or take actions on the board. However, that does come with a risk, because the third option for taking dice is that you can retrieve all of your colour dice from wherever they are, whether they're in play or not. So what could happen is you may have selected dice from another player. They may be either sitting here ready to be used, or you may have even utilised some of them in various spots on your board. And if they say, I want to take all my dice back, then they just get to take them from wherever they may be, and that may mess up some of your plans, some of the actions you're going to take. So while it can be quite good to get a whole heap of dice, you do have to be a little bit careful of how you use those dice from other players. So they're the 3 ways that you can gather or retrieve dice so that you can carry out more and more actions. And obviously the more dice that you have, the bigger scope you have to carry out actions. So that's basically the game. Let's have a look at how the game ends. So the game continues until there are no more exploration cards in the deck, basically. Once that happens, the first person then to complete a card, and they obviously can't take a new card, that triggers the end of the game. Every person then gets one more turn, and then we add up the scores. So for scoring, you're going to add up the totals on any of the exploration cards that you've completed that are in your pile. In addition to that, any cards that have those symbols on them will earn you bonus points for having sets, and depending on how many sets and combinations, you're going to earn points there. As well as that, some of the Indian cards have these TP symbols, and also some of the exploration cards have the TP symbols. So you're going to add up all of those symbols that you have on both types of cards, and whoever has the most TPs will earn a bonus 12 points. Whoever has the second most will earn a bonus of 6 points. Add that to your score, and whoever has the highest score is the winner.
In summary, players will allocate dice to carry out actions. After the action has been performed, dice will either return to the player or are placed on the central board. Dice can be recovered by either taking all of your own dice from anywhere or all of the dice from a specific location. By carrying out exploration actions, players can score the map cards. Enlisting the help of the native tribes can assist you in this task.
So really this game is quite simple. Once you've played a round or two, you start to see how the dice work, how you can best utilise those dice. The trick really is trying to recycle them as much as possible so you don't have to waste turns retrieving dice. But at some point during the game you're going to need to do that, so timing is fairly important. You want to try and get as many dice as you can when you take that action so that you can then continue on your merry way. It's a great example of an exploration type game and a very good example of dice in a game. So if you like both of those things, then you do well to check out Discoveries, The Journals of Lewis and Clark. Thanks for watching. Happy gaming.